They said she was crazy to buy it. A rusted cruise ship, half sunken in debt and decay, sitting at the edge of a forgotten dock. 4 years, it had been left to rot, a metal graveyard covered in salt, seagull droppings, and silence. The hull was peeling, the windows smashed, and the decks looked like something from a ghost story. Nobody wanted it. Not investors. Not collectors. Not even scrap buyers. But when Maya saw it listed for auction at a price barely higher than a used car, she didn't hesitate. She just said, "I'll take it." People laughed. A mechanic girl, barely 30, buying a ship bigger than a city block? They said she'd lost her mind. But Maya wasn't like everyone else. Where others saw ruin, she saw potential, and something else. Something she couldn't explain. There was something about that ship that pulled her in, like it had been waiting for her. The morning she boarded it for the first time, fog covered the dock, curling around the massive hull like smoke from another world. Her boots echoed on the empty gangway. The smell of rust and old seawater hit her nose. Inside, the ship was a tomb. Faded carpets, broken lights, and furniture still bolted to the floors, as if time had stopped mid-voyage. A half-drunk glass of wine still sat on one of the dining tables. Maya ran her hand along the wall, feeling the cold metal under layers of dust. Somewhere deep inside, something clanked, a low, hollow sound that didn't belong to the waves. She froze. The ship was supposed to be empty. But that sound, it came from below deck. She took a slow breath, her flashlight trembling slightly in her hand, and whispered, "What are you hiding down there?" The sound echoed again, faint but real, a metallic creak, followed by a low thud. It came from somewhere deep in the lower decks. Maya's flashlight flickered as she stepped forward, her boots crunching on broken glass. The narrow corridor smelled of rust and old oil. Every step stirred the stale air, thick with the memory of 1,000 forgotten journeys. She paused at the stairwell, shining her light down the dark shaft. The steps disappeared into shadows, swallowed by silence. Probably just the hull settling, she muttered, trying to convince herself. But something in her gut said otherwise. She gripped the railing and started descending, one careful step at a time. The lower deck was colder. Pipes lined the ceiling like veins, dripping seawater that echoed in steady rhythms. Her light swept across the walls, faded signs, peeling paint, and a cracked emergency map. The deeper she went, the stranger it felt. She passed storage rooms, all empty except for rusted barrels and the occasional seagull feather. Then, at the end of a long hallway, she found a door that didn't match the others. Heavy steel, newer bolts, and a padlock that didn't belong. Her heart quickened. Why would there be a locked door on an abandoned ship? She knelt to inspect it, tracing the edge of the lock with her fingers. It wasn't rusted. In fact, it looked recently replaced. "Someone's been here," she whispered. Maya fetched a small toolbox from her backpack and started working. The lock resisted at first, but after a few minutes, it gave a sharp click. She pushed the door open. The smell hit her instantly, not the sharp tang of seawater, but something else. Old fuel. Leather. Dust. She aimed her flashlight inside. The room was small but clean, like someone had sealed it deliberately. Along the far wall sat a row of heavy wooden crates, the kind used decades ago for shipping valuables. She stepped closer, running her hand over the faded stencils. Asterisk Marine Division, restricted cargo. Asterisk her pulse raced. She crouched and pried open one of the lids. Inside was a metal box wrapped in cloth. When she lifted it, it clanged softly, something solid inside. She unwrapped it, her breath catching as the light reflected off gold. Dozens of gold bars, stacked neatly, each stamped with a date from the 1970s. For a moment, Maya just stared. Her brain struggled to process what she was seeing. She had spent her whole life fixing engines and scraping by, and now, sitting in her hands, was enough wealth to change everything. But she didn't scream or cheer. Instead, she frowned. Something wasn't right. If this was real treasure, why had no one taken it? Why was it still here, hidden and locked away? She opened another crate. More gold. And another. Old jewelry, coins, and ornate watches. Each item was packed carefully, preserved as if meant to last forever. On one of the boxes, she noticed a small envelope taped to the side. The edges were yellowed with age, but the ink was still legible. Asterisk property of the Maritime Recovery Project. Do not disclose. Asterisk Maritime Recovery Project. The words sounded familiar. She'd seen something about it years ago, a government salvage mission that vanished without explanation. Ships had gone missing, millions of dollars in cargo lost. People said it was a cover-up, that the wrecks were never found. Until now. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She realized this wasn't just forgotten treasure. It was stolen, hidden, buried under decades of secrecy. Footsteps echoed from above. She froze, gripping the flashlight tightly. The sound was faint but steady, deliberate. Someone else was on the ship. She killed the light and pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering in her chest. The footsteps grew louder, descending the stairs. A man's voice echoed faintly, calm and low. "Keep your light down. She might still be here." Maya's blood ran cold. She crawled behind the crates, careful not to make a sound. 2 beams of light swept across the room as shadows appeared in the doorway. She could see their outlines, 2 men, both carrying flashlights and wearing dark jackets. One of them kicked a loose can across the floor, the clatter slicing through the silence. "Check the back," the first man said. "If she found it, we can't let her walk away." Her heart pounded so hard she was sure they'd hear it. She pressed her hand over her mouth, forcing herself to stay quiet. The men moved slowly, scanning every corner. The smell of fuel grew stronger. Her eyes darted to the far end of the room, an air vent, barely large enough for her to crawl through. When their light swung the other way, she moved. Crawling fast, silent, every inch a gamble. Her jacket caught on a bolt, tearing slightly, but she didn't stop. She reached the vent, pushed the grate aside, and slipped inside just as one of the flashlights turned in her direction. "Wait, did you hear that?" one of them said. Maya didn't breathe. The metal felt ice cold against her palms as she crawled deeper into the duct. Voices echoed behind her, muffled but angry. "Find her." Her knees scraped the metal as she moved faster, the sound blending with the hum of the ship. Finally, she saw light, a small opening ahead. She pushed through, emerging into another corridor near the engine room. Her chest heaved as she leaned against the wall, heart pounding in her ears. Who were they? And how did they know about the gold? She knew one thing for sure. This was no ordinary ship. It had secrets worth killing for. And now, she was part of it. Maya's hand shook as she wiped the sweat from her face, her pulse still racing. The sound of boots echoed faintly in the distance, growing softer, then vanishing into another corridor. She pressed her ear against the cold steel wall, listening. Nothing. Only the distant groan of the ship's hull and the slow drip of leaking pipes. Her breath came out shaky. Whoever those men were, they knew exactly what they were looking for, and now they knew she was on board. She couldn't leave. Not yet. Something about the gold, the letter, the sealed room, it all pointed to something bigger than a hidden stash. She pulled the torn edge of her jacket tighter and forced herself to move quietly down the narrow passage. The floor creaked beneath her boots, and every sound felt too loud, too revealing. The engine room was dark and cramped, filled with the smell of old oil and salt. Her flashlight beam cut through the blackness, landing on machinery coated in rust. But even in its decay, she could tell, the engine wasn't as old as the ship. Some parts had been replaced recently. Her father had been a ship engineer. She knew the feel of old steel versus the touch of something newer. Someone had been keeping this thing alive, even after it was declared abandoned. She crouched beside the control panel, brushing off a thick layer of dust. Underneath, a small indicator light blinked faintly, green. Her stomach tightened. The ship still had power. Not much, but enough to keep a few systems running. She followed a set of cables leading out of the room, tucked neatly along the wall, newer than anything else around them. The cables ended at a sealed metal door she hadn't noticed before. It looked reinforced, welded shut from the outside. Painted faintly across the top were the words, "Crew Research Bay, authorized personnel only." Her throat went dry. She set down her bag and pulled out a wrench, hammering carefully along the seam until the weld cracked open. The door gave way with a sharp hiss of air, like the ship was exhaling after years of holding its breath. Inside was a large room lined with file cabinets, broken monitors, and storage crates. Papers littered the floor, and the air smelled faintly of chemicals. She stepped inside cautiously, sweeping her flashlight across the walls. Faded charts, ship diagrams, and scanned photographs covered one side. They weren't pictures of tourists or cruisers. They were blueprints of underwater excavation sites, coordinates marked in red ink. One file sat open on a nearby desk. She flipped through it, her brow furrowing. It wasn't just about the ship, it was about what it had carried. The Maritime Recovery Project hadn't been about salvage at all. It had been a covert operation to recover lost assets from World War II. Gold, art, documents, and experimental technology. And according to the reports, the ship she now owned was the final transport vessel. The last mission. The one that never returned. Her heart pounded. $75 million, she whispered. That's what the report listed as the total cargo value. $75 million in unreported treasure. She felt the weight of the truth hit her all at once. A sudden metallic crash made her spin around. Her flashlight swung toward the door, still open. Shadows moved outside. A voice called out softly, "She's here." Panic surged through her chest. She darted behind a set of metal drums, crouching low. The footsteps grew louder. 2, maybe 3 men. One carried a light. "Search everything," a deep voice ordered. "We can't let her send that report." Report? Maya frowned. She glanced at the desk again. Her eyes fell on an old communication terminal, the power light blinking faintly. Her pulse quickened. The ship still had an active satellite uplink. If she could reach it, she could send out proof of what she found before they caught her. She crawled toward it silently, keeping low, moving between shadows. The men's flashlights swept across the room, lighting up papers and crates. One of them kicked over a chair. She couldn't have gone far. Maya reached the console, her fingers trembling as she flipped the switch. The monitor crackled to life, faint static glowing across the glass. She typed quickly, searching for a connection. The screen flickered, loading a transmission bar that crawled painfully slow. Then, her elbow knocked over a loose wrench. It clattered against the floor, echoing through the metal room. The men froze. Over there. She didn't think. She hit send and ran. Bullets cracked through the air, pinging off steel. Sparks flew as she sprinted through the hallway, her footsteps pounding on the grated floor. Behind her, shouts echoed, getting closer. She turned a corner and burst through a maintenance door, slamming it shut behind her. Her lungs burned. The sound of running feet faded slightly. She pressed her forehead against the cold wall, her mind racing. She didn't know if the message had gone through. She didn't even know who it would reach. But she had to believe someone would see it. The corridor she'd stumbled into was narrow and twisted, leading deeper into the ship's belly. The air grew damp and cold again. Her flashlight flickered, struggling to stay alive. She passed through another set of doors and found herself in what looked like a ballroom, vast, empty, its chandeliers swaying gently from the motion of the tide. The silence was haunting. The echoes of her footsteps bounced off marble floors and broken mirrors. She stopped near the center, staring at her reflection in one of the cracked panels. Dirt streaked her face, her hair was wild, and her eyes glowed with defiance. In that moment, she realized something. The men chasing her weren't just after the gold. They were after the secret the ship carried, one that could rewrite everything the world thought it knew about what was lost at sea. And whatever it was, she was the only one standing between it and the people who wanted it buried forever. The ballroom silence didn't last long. A faint vibration ran through the floor beneath her boots, steady and rhythmic. Engines. Somewhere deep below, something had come alive. The ship had been dead for decades, but now, it was breathing again. Maya spun toward the grand staircase that led down to the lower decks. Faint blue light pulsed from below, flickering against the cracked glass walls. She crept down, every sense on edge. The air grew hotter as she descended. When she reached the bottom, she saw it. An auxiliary generator room, lights flickering in uneven waves. One of the machines was running, humming faintly, its digital display blinking with new data. The power cables she had traced earlier were connected to it. Someone had reactivated it, and not long ago. Her eyes narrowed as she examined the controls. The interface showed a live system status, with one line that made her stomach tighten. Transmission sent, awaiting response. She hadn't been the first to reach that terminal. Someone else had used it before her, maybe the same people now hunting her. The ship's comm system crackled faintly through a speaker overhead, making her flinch. A distorted male voice filled the room, calm and calculated. "We know you are still on board. Walk away now, and you might get off this ship alive." Maya froze, staring up at the rusted speaker. Her heart pounded, but anger pushed through the fear. You shouldn't have left the evidence, she muttered under her breath. She turned and started moving again, following the sound of the running generator through a narrow maintenance corridor. The walls closed in around her, pipes dripping cold water on her shoulders. Her flashlight caught movement ahead, a flicker, like a reflection. She crouched, waiting. The reflection came again. She crawled closer, and then she saw it, a glass panel built into the wall, with something on the other side. It was a chamber, sealed shut, containing crates similar to the one she'd found earlier, but these weren't gold. Inside the glass enclosure were rows of sealed metal containers, each labeled with strings of numbers and letters she didn't recognize. One label read Prototype Fuel Cell, Property of Maritime Division. Her mind spun. These weren't treasure boxes. They were experimental tech. She tried to wipe away the dust from the glass for a better view, and her fingers brushed against a small switch on the wall beside it. Without warning, the lights overhead flickered, and a low hum filled the air. A faint hydraulic hiss echoed as the chamber door unsealed with a heavy click. She stumbled back, shielding her face as the stale air rushed out. The hum grew louder. Inside the chamber, one of the containers emitted a faint blue glow. It wasn't like any fuel she had ever seen. It pulsed softly, like it was alive. Maya's reflection shimmered against the light as she stepped closer. "This isn't gold," she whispered. "It's power." The comm speaker above her crackled again, this time louder. "Don't touch it." The voice was closer now, clearer. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Maya's heart raced. She spun around and saw the shadows of two figures entering the corridor behind her. They were the same men from before, flashlights cutting through the dim air. She darted toward the chamber, grabbed one of the glowing containers, and bolted through a side door just as the first man shouted, "Stop her!" Her footsteps echoed down the steel hallway. The glow from the container illuminated her path like a lantern, its light reflecting off the damp walls. She turned a corner, ducked into a service room, and slammed the door behind her. The pounding of footsteps thundered past on the other side. She leaned against the wall, panting. Her hands trembled as she stared at the object she was holding. It was small, compact, almost weightless. Through the transparent casing, liquid energy swirled like liquid lightning. Whatever this thing was, it was worth far more than gold. Her father's words echoed in her head, words he used to say whenever she got lost in her work. "Machines don't hide secrets, Maya. People do." She understood now. The gold wasn't the real treasure. It was bait. A cover for something the world was never meant to find. The intercom buzzed again, the voice now sharper. "You've made a mistake. That prototype was never meant to leave containment. Put it back." Maya glanced at the container, then toward the far wall. There was another terminal there, covered in grime, its screen still faintly glowing. She approached it, wiped the dust away, and saw a name flashing at the top, Captain E. Norwood, final log. Her fingers hesitated, then pressed play. The screen flickered, and a grainy video appeared. A weary man in a captain's uniform, eyes sunken, voice trembling. "To whoever finds this," he began, "this ship was never lost. It was buried. The project went too far. What we found at the deep site wasn't supposed to exist, and the energy we brought back, it's unstable. We sealed it to protect everyone, but they wanted it weaponized." He took a shaky breath. "If the cargo is recovered, don't let them take it. Destroy it, or it will destroy everything else." The screen went dark. Maya stood there in silence, her heart pounding in her ears. The humming container in her hands glowed brighter, as if it could hear what had just been said. Somewhere above, the engines roared back to life, shaking the entire ship. Alarms blared, echoing through the corridors. The men were back, shouting orders. "She's in the research bay. Don't let her reach the deck." She tucked the container into her bag, tightened the strap across her shoulder, and looked toward the stairway leading up. The lights flickered again, painting the walls in flashes of blue and red. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't let the wrong people get what was hidden inside that ship. Weeks passed, but the ocean never gave back what it took that night. The ship was finally towed ashore, its engines silent, its decks blackened by salt and smoke. Officials came with questions, cameras, and caution tape, but no one could explain the strange readings in the water or the faint glow that appeared beneath the waves every few nights before vanishing again. They called it a reflection, a trick of light, but Maya knew better. She stood on the dock, watching the ship she once owned fade into the mist. It looked smaller now, like a monument to everything she'd discovered, and everything she'd lost. People asked what she had found, what it had been worth. She always gave the same answer: enough to never forget. Back in her small workshop by the harbour, pieces of the ship's past still surrounded her. Maps, photographs, scraps of metal she couldn't bring herself to throw away. Sometimes, when the nights were quiet, her radio crackled with static, and for just a moment, she could swear she heard the hum again, that low, rhythmic pulse that once shook the entire sea. Word spread about the mechanic girl who found a lost ship and walked away from $75 million. Some called her foolish. Others called her brave. But to Maya, it didn't matter. She hadn't found treasure. She'd uncovered a warning, a legacy too heavy for any one person to hold. And deep beneath the waves, it was still alive.